Joining me now, CNN senior political analyst Mark Preston, Seth Waxman, a criminal defense attorney and a former federal prosecutor, and Molly Ball, CNN political analyst and national political correspondent for Time magazine. Good to have all of you with us. Mark, as we look at this, let's start off here first with the relationship between the president and Michael Cohen. The president now trying to downplay this relationship almost, it almost sounds like he's going for a George Papadopoulos coffee boy sort of relationship, which we know is not the case when it comes to Michael Cohen.
Yeah, look, it's absurd. It's absurd we're even having to have this discussion. But what we've seen from President Trump is that he's very effective, as is his allies, in trying to divert attention, create chaos, create doubt about everything. He could be holding up a piece of paper that's black and say, look, this is white. And you are going to have people who support President Trump who will believe him. Now, the question is, as a society, when are we going to look, Erica, and say, you know what? What he's saying is absurd. It's unrealistic, and he's got to come to some realization that he's got to tell the truth. Like, we have to know the truth in order for us to move forward. And right now, we are very much stalled.
In terms of comments that are really getting a lot of attention, too, we can't ignore the fact that this president, the president said that flipping should, in his words, be almost illegal. Seth, just put this into perspective for us. This made a lot of people this morning just stop in their tracks as they heard those words. Why?
Yeah, it's really shocking. I can tell you, when I was a federal prosecutor, I used to sit on wiretaps for days and weeks, and these are the kinds of conversations we would hear among hardened criminals that talk about who's flipping and who needs to be silenced and who should get benefits to keep them on the reservation. And to hear the president of the United States make those kinds of comments is really shocking. He sounds like he's talking like a person who is a target or defendant in a criminal case, not the president of the United States.
Molly, to Mark's point, too, about the varying, and what we heard from Jeremy, the varying narratives, versions of events that have happened. There are also these other moments that we're hearing from the president. He runs as a candidate, as the law and order candidate, as we know. Then once he becomes president, he is now talking about how he has to put the word justice in quotes when he talks about his own Justice Department. He talks about how the laws are terrible in this country. Obviously, Molly, you can't have it both ways.
Well, I think one of the things that's so significant about this episode is that Trump has almost dropped any pretense that his principal motivation is the good of the United States of America. Everything is about him. Whether the law is good is about whether it's good to him. Whether the Justice Department is doing its job depends on how it is treating him. And so, whether somebody gets a security clearance is not about whether they can provide help to America's national security. It's about whether they've insulted him. And so this is just a continuation of the Trump we've always seen. I think the problem for him is he can say whatever he wants about Michael Cohen, but what we saw and why it was such a turning point, Michael Cohen's plea, was there's so much evidence in there that doesn't rely on just the word of Michael Cohen. There is internal information from the Trump organization. There's tapes like the one that we've already heard. And so that is going to be harder to get away from than just insulting the character of someone who used to work with him.
The president, too, in talking about these payments, he said, as we just heard in that clip, that the payments didn't come through the campaign funds. It's not a crime. And so that nothing to see here on that point. And then also going on to say that, Cohen essentially couldn't plead guilty to it because it's not a crime, which we know, Seth, but, just be my legal voice of reason here. You can't plead guilty to something if it's not an actual crime. The judge is never going to accept a plea unless there's a crime attached.
Right. We just had a federal Article 3 federal judge accept a plea under oath with federal prosecutors in the room. Like that happens every day across this country. So Mr. Trump's not a lawyer, and he is way, way off on this one. It is a crime. Mr. Cohen pled guilty to it, and he's implicated the president of the United States in that crime.
Mark, you made the point, and we've talked about it so many times, about there are certain things that are going to play well with the president's base no matter what. One of them is the president pointing out here, listen, everything that we're seeing, everybody, that has to do with Paul Manafort and his conviction this week, that has to do with the plea deal with Michael Cohen, Russia's not involved here. He's got a point, but how does that actually, is that working for him beyond his base to continue with that narrative at this point?
What's working for him is when he goes out and says, Paul Manafort worked for Ronald Reagan. That's a dog whistle. That's a really loud dog whistle to all the Republicans out there to say, hey, look, he's one of us. He was one of our guys, meaning if, we should have sympathy for him. Oh, and by the way, if I do pardon him, you should support me because he was a rock solid Republican. And this is the same president, by the way, that talked about draining the swamp, but yet going out and saying all these laudatory things about somebody who really has become a caricature of the swamp, and why Americans hate Washington, D.C., rightfully so. It's just about how special interests have so much control over this. Look, the thing about Donald Trump, which is so frustrating for me, maybe it is for everybody else, is that he's so transparent in what he's doing. Molly's absolutely right. It's all about him. It's not about the country. And I just don't understand how people don't understand that.
There's also a lot of reporting out this morning in terms of the mindset of Donald Trump and how it's affecting the White House. They talk about how dark, how grim it is in the White House today. Molly, the new cover of Time, of course, we see, and we're going to put it up there. This is now the third in a series. It says In Deep there. Is your sense, though, that it's actually any different today for the folks in the White House, that Donald Trump is in a different mood this time around?
Well, yes and no. I mean, as we all know, the president's moods are quite variable and quite capricious, and how he feels about something is not necessarily a reflection of how dire his situation actually is. And at this point, there have been so many departures from the White House that in a lot of ways it just feels empty in there, and a lot of people who are still there are so numb to these constant news cycles of outrage and controversy that they aren't capable, frankly, of really feeling panicked at this point, no matter how dire things appear to get. And so that's why I think that, thank you for showing our wonderful covers by our brilliant art department, but that's why I think they're so evocative, is because it is much more a sense of gradually rising waters than it is, you know, a single turning point that makes everything different. This is, I think the Cohen plea is a major milestone in the saga of this administration, but it is also the case that there's been a constant drip of people coming forward, information coming out, and new implications that get closer and closer to the president. He is increasingly painted into a corner.
It'll be interesting to see, too, especially based on this reporting in the Wall Street Journal this morning, whether the next drip could be coming from David Pecker at American Media. We'll be watching for that. Mark Preston, Seth Waxman, Molly Ball, appreciate it. Thanks to all of you.